After drifting an hour or two in the lower woods, I set out for the summit of a hill 900 feet high with a view to getting as near to the heart of the storm as soon as possible. In order to reach it, I had to cross Dry Creek, a tributary of the Yuba that goes crawling along the base of the hill on the northwest. It was now a booming river as large as the Tuolumne. At ordinary stages, its current brown with mining mud washed down from many a flame and mottled with sluice boxes and fence rails and logs that had long lain above its reach. A slim foot bridge stretched across it and now scarcely above the swollen current here. I was glad to linger, gazing and listening while the storm was in its richest mood. A gray rain flood above, the brown river flood beneath. The language of the river was scarcely less enchanting than that of the wind and rain. Sublime over bloom of the main, bouncing, exulting current, the swash and gurgle of the eddies, and keen dash and clash of heavy waves breaking against rocks, and the smooth, downy hush of the shallow currents, feeling their way through the willow thickets of the margin. Amid all these varied throngs of sounds, I heard the smothered burping and rumbling of boulders on the bottom of the creek. They were shoving and rolling forward against one another in wild rush after lain with still for probably 100 years or more. The glad creek rose high above its banks and wandered from its channel over many a briery sand flat and meadow. Alders and willows waist deep were bearing up against the current with nervous, trembling gestures, as if afraid of being carried away, while supple branches, bending confidently, dripped lightly and rose again as if stroking the wild waters in play, leaving the bridge and passing on through the storm-thrashed woods. All the ground seemed to be moving. Pine tassels, flakes of bark, soil, leaves, and broken branches were being swept forward, and many a rock fragment, weathered from exposed ledges and now receiving its first rounding and polishing in the wild streams of the storm. On they rushed through every gulch and hollow, leaping and gliding, working with a will and rejoicing like living creatures. Nor was the flood confined to the ground. Every tree had a water system of its own, spreading far and wide like miniature Amazons and Mississippis. Toward midday, and cloud, wind, and rain reached their highest development. The storm was in full bloom and formed, from my commanding outlook on the hilltop, one of the most glorious views I had ever beheld. As far as the eye could reach, above and beneath and around, wind-driven rains filled the air like the one vast waterfall. Detached clouds swept imposingly up the valleys, as if they were endowed with independent motion and had special work to do in the replenishing the mountain wells, now rising above the pine top, now descending into the midst, fondling their airy spires and soothing every branch and leaf with gentleness in the midst of all the savage sound and motion. Others keeping near the blighted betray behind separate groves, and brought them forward into relief with a marble distinctness. Passing in front, eclipsed whole groves in succession, pine after pine melting in the gray fringes and bursting forth again, seemingly clearer than before. The storms of the storms are in great part measured and controlled by the topography of the region where they rise and over which they pass. When, therefore, we attempt to study from them from the valleys or from gaps and openings of the forest, we're confounded by a multitude of separate and apparently antagonistic impressions. The bottom of the storm is broken into innumerable waves and currents that surge against the hillsides, like sea waves against a shore, and these reacting on the other neither surface of the storm, erode immense cavernous hollows and canyons and sweep forward the resulting detritus in long trains, like the moraines of glaciers, but as we ascend, these partial, confusing effects disappear, and the phenomena are beheld united and harmonious. The longer I gazed into the storm, the more plainly visible it became. The drifting cloud detritus gave it a kind of visible body, which explained many perplexing phenomena and published its movements in plain terms, while the texture of the falling mass of rain rounded it out and rendered it more complete because raindrops differ in size as they gave to different velocities and overtake, clash against one another, producing mist and spray. They also, of course, yield unequal compliance to the force of the wind, which gives rise to a still greater degree of interference and passionate gusts. Sweep off clouds of spray from the groves like that torn from the wave tops in a gale. All these factors of irregularity and density and color and texture of the general rain mass tend to make it more appreciable and telling. It is then seen as one grand flood rushing over the brink and bray, bending pines like weeds, curving this way and that, whirling in huge eddies and hollows and dells, while the main current pours grandly over all, like ocean currents over the landscapes that lie hidden at the bottom of the sea. I watched the gestures of the pines while the storm was at its height, as it was easy to see that they were not stressed. Several large sugar pines stood near the thicket in which I was sheltered, bowing solemnly and tossing their long arms as if interpreting the very words of the storm, while accepting its wildest onsets with passionate exhilaration. The lions were feeding. Those who have observed sunflowers feasting on sunshine during the golden days of Indian summer know that none of their gestures express thankfulness. The celestial food is too heavily given, too heartily taken to leave room for thanks. The pines were evidently accepting the benefactions of the storm in the same thankfulness. Full sounded manner, and when I looked down among the budding hazel and still lower to the young violets and fern tufts of the rocks, I noticed the same divine methods of giving and taking and the same exquisite adaptations of what seems an outbreak of violent and uncontrollable force to the purpose of beautiful and delicate life. Calms like sleep come upon landscapes just as they do on people and trees, and storms awaken them in the same way. In the dry midsummer of the lower portion of the range, the withered hills and valleys seem to lie as empty and expressionless as dead shells on a shore. Even the highest mountains may be found occasionally dull and uncommunicative, as if in some way they had lost their countenance and shrunk to less than half their real stature. But when the lightnings crash and echo in the canyons and the clouds come down, wreathing and crowning their bald, snowy heads, every feature beams with expression as they writhe again in all their imposing majesty. Storms are fine speakers and tell all they know, but their voices of the lightning torrents and rushing wind are much less numerous than the nameless still. Small voices too low for human ears, and because we are poor listeners, we fail to catch that is fairly within reach. Our best rains are heard mostly on roofs and wind in chimneys, and even when, by choice or compulsion, we are pushed into the heart of the storm, the confusion made by currents Equipments in nervous haste and mean fear prevent our hearing any other than the loudest expressions. Yet we may draw enjoyment from storm wind sounds that are beyond hearing. In storm movements we cannot see, the sublime whirl of planets surround their suns in as silent as raindrops oozing in the dark. Among the roots of the plants in all this great storm, as in every other, there are tones and gestures inexpressibly gentle, manifested in the midst of what is called violence and fury, but easily recognized by all those who look and listen for them. The rain brought out the colors of the wood with delightful freshness. The rich brown of the bark of the trees and the fallen birds and leaves and dead ferns. The grays of rocks and lichens, the light purple of swelling buds and the warm yellow green of libercus and mosses. The air was streaming with delightful fragrance, not rising and wafting past in separate masses, but diffused through all the atmosphere. Pine woods are always fragrant, but most so in spring, when the young tassels are opening and in warm weather, when the various gums and balsams are softened by the sun. The wind now chafing their innumerable needles and the warm rain was steeping them. Mondanella grows here in large beds in the opening, and there is plenty of laurel and dell, and manzitas on the hillside, and the rosy, fragrant camobeta carpets the ground almost everywhere. These, with the gum and balsams of the wood, form the main local fragrance fountains of the storm. The ascending clouds of aroma, wind rolled and rain washed, become pure like light and traveled with the wind as part of it. Toward the middle of the afternoon, the main flood cloud lifted on its western border, revealing a beautiful section of the Sacramento Valley. Some 20 or 30 miles away, brilliantly sunlighted and glistening with sun sheets as if paid with silver. Soon afterward, a jagged bluff-like cloud with a sheer face appeared over the valley of the Yuba, dark-colored and roughened with numerous furrows, like some huge lava table. The Blue Coast Range was seen stretching along the sky like a beveled wall, and the somber, craggy colored and roughened with numerous Marsville buttes rose impressively out of a flooded plain, like islands out of the sea. Then the rain began to stable and abate, and I sauntered down through the dripping blushes, reveling in the universal vigor and freshness that inspired all the life about me. How clean and unworn and unmortal the woods seemed to be. The lofty cedars in full bloom, laden with the golden pollen of their unwashed plumes shining. The pines rocking gently and settling back into rest. An evening sunbeam spangling on the broad leaves of mandaros, their tracery of yellow boughs, relieved against dusky thickets of chestnut oaks, liverworts, lycopodiums. Ferns were exulting in glorious revival, and every moss that had ever lived seemed to be coming, crowding back from the dead to clothe each trunk in stone and living green. The steaming ground seemed fairly to throb and tingle with life. Similac, Brilliata, Saxifrage, and young violets were pushing up as if already conscious of the summer glory, and innumerable green and yellow buds were peeping in and smiling everywhere. As for the birds and squirrels, not a wing or tail of them was to be seen while the storm was blowing. Squirrels dislike wet weather more than cats do. Therefore, they were perched at home, rocking in their dry nests. The birds were hiding in the dells of the wind, most of the strongest of them pecking at acorns and manzanita berries, but most of them were perched on low twigs, their breast feathers puffed out, keeping one another company through the hard time as best they could. When I arrived at the village about sundown, the good people bestirred themselves, pitying my bedraggled condition, as if I were some benumbed castaway, snatched from the sea, while I, in turn, warm with excitement and reeking like the ground, pitied them, being dry and defrauded of all the glory that nature had spread round about them that day.